Get started? Yeah. Right. Welcome, everyone. Trust is a belief built over time. It's not a big gesture or a successful delivery, but something consistent and reliable over time. At Baringa, trust has been at the heart of our mission for 25 years. In our vision statement, to be the world's most trusted advisory firm. I work with people every day that have mastered the art of building trusted relationships with people. We start our conversations by listening to their challenges and to their ambitions, and then we can create roadmaps which not only solve the problems of today, but can deliver impact way after we've moved on to the next challenge. Today, I'd like to share some of the lessons we've learned from building trusted relationships with people and apply those to building trusted relationships with your data. But first, let me introduce myself. I'm Frances O'Rafferty, a career consultant with expertise in data in the financial services space. I began my career as a business intelligence developer on that mission to get the right data to the right people at the right time so they could make those critical business decisions. However, it wasn't that easy. Quite often, the data was in the wrong format, we couldn't access it, or it just wasn't good enough quality. So this quickly led me down the rabbit hole into the world of ETL, solution architecture, data management, and more recently, bringing it all back together into data products. Always on that mission to get a trusted, simplified view of complex data landscapes within large organizations. Alongside my work, I have my husband, Luke, who's also a data geek and here in the audience, who helps me navigate my life as a working parent to my 3 wonderful children and the recent addition of our cat, Lily. So as I said, trust is a journey, and it's always good to know where we're going. So to start with, I'm going to share the journey that we're going to take today. First, we'll look at the benefits that you can get from having trusted data within your organization. Then we'll move on to look at how you can develop trust over time, and in particular, deep diving into the 4 pillars of data trust. And I'll wrap up with a framework for how to put some of this into practice, and some of the impact that we've seen when trusted data was adopted. Who here has one of these 3 in their business strategy? How about this one? You can't deliver these very easily or at all without having the trusted data behind it. To be data-driven, we need to be consulting our data to help us make better decisions. If you don't trust that data, how are you going to know if it's pointing you in the right direction or taking you down the wrong path? If you don't trust your data, you can't be data-driven. We all know that it's easier to retain customers than to acquire new ones. In a recent survey we did of the insurance industry, 30% of the business leaders said that customer retention or improving their customer experience was in their top challenge. If we have trusted data, we can use that to make our customer experiences better. For example, in a call center, we may have notes fields that are sporadically populated by agents who are taking calls. They're not incentivized to put good quality notes in those fields. They're incentivized on how many calls they get through. We can leverage tools like GenAI to automatically populate those notes fields instead in a standardized way, ensuring that users can trust that data and make better decisions with it. And while I'm on the subject of AI, there are many factors into whether or not you can trust an AI solution. But if you don't trust the data going in, you're not going to be able to trust the decisions coming out. If we think back to the digital revolution, we went from people printing out letters, which were checked by humans for accuracy before sending out to customers, to online portals where people intrinsically trusted that data that was displayed in front of them with no human oversight. That was made possible because of the automation and the validation and reconciliation checks that we baked into these systems to make those numbers trusted. As we move into the era of AI, we're again asking people to put more trust in complex systems with even less human oversight. It comes down to trust in the data, trust in the process and the workflow, so that ultimately we can trust those decisions that AI is making on our behalf. But trust isn't an on-off switch. It's something that develops over time. An example that often comes up in my work in the Working Parents Network, when a parent comes back to work after having a child, and you have to find that childcare provider. I remember thinking I was never going to find someone who could look after my daughter the way I did, and I was extremely nervous about coming back. But then I started to look at websites, visit childcare providers, look at reviews, speak to other people. I started to validate that this might be possible. She then started with her childminder, and initially I'd be waiting for those texts to come through. I'd be nervous dropping her off. But then it got to a point where she'd run off without even waving goodbye, and I'd barely checked my phone all day. I'd developed that trusted relationship with that childcare provider and could now leave my daughter with her with no worries. It was a journey from distrust to belief. And we see this all the time in the data world. Think about that report you developed. How many people ignored it at the beginning? You had to chase people to use it. You had to go and speak to them and get them engaged. Then what did they do? They exported it to Excel. They validated it against some data that they already trusted to ensure that they trusted the data you were now providing. Then they start engaging with the data tools a bit more. But they ask for this level of drill down or some reconciliation within that report so that they can get a bit more trust. They want to know exactly where that number on that summary screen has come from and why it's telling them to do a certain action. But then, when you get true adoption of data, they are using those dashboards on a daily basis. They rely on them within their business processes. You've developed trust in that data. So, turns out that building trust with people and trust in data, we can map it quite well. In the same way, I look for someone that was competent to look after my child, could have that open communication with me. I look for transparency in data so that I know exactly what I'm looking at and I'm not confused. In the same way, I look for someone that was reliable, that would turn up every day. I look for data that is consistent. It's not good one day and bad the next. I looked for someone who was empathetic, who was going to understand that leaving my child was a big deal for me and wasn't just going to brush it off. In the same way, we can't expect all users to just use the report we give them. We need to think about the user experience that we're baking in and meet them where they are. And finally, I ended up going with someone who was recommended. How often, when you have to make a choice, do you go with the person that recommends something? The same goes for our data. If you have champions championing the trusted data sources and asking you and engaging you with them, then you won't go off and try and find the data somewhere else yourself. So let's dive into the first of these, which is transparency. It's important that a user knows exactly what they're looking at. If not, the all too common scenario occurs, where two people think they're looking at the same data set, and they're not. I actually saw a really good post on LinkedIn about this last week. There is an image of a CFO and a COO discussing how many appointments took place in the last month. The CFO had calculated it based on the invoice date, whereas the COO had calculated it based on the date of the appointment. By embedding the metadata with the data in the same user experience, we can ensure that people really know what they're looking at, whether through things like tooltips, links out to business glossaries, overview and context pages alongside your data. Whatever it means, that person really knows what they're looking at. And the same when you get to quality metrics. Are you counting unique customers, or might there be duplicates in there because you're counting per appointment? When was the report last refreshed? Did 2 people run it at different times and then therefore looking at different results? Including things like the last refreshed date within a report or a data set is a really easy way to get around this. And lineage. Knowing that you've got the data from the same sources. Often, when we get data from different sources, it's not quite the same. And lineage is a really powerful tool. It gives us that journey for data. And like I said, the journey and the transparency helps build the trust. They can see exactly every step that that data point has made to the landing on their desk in that report and driving their decision. But lineage is also useful within change programs. We get more trust that our change programs are not going to break our data because we can see the impact and we can communicate that back. But once we've got the trust in the data we see today, how do we trust it again tomorrow? This is where consistency comes in. Data quality is never done. It's important that we keep on top of our data quality issues, ensuring that we can monitor them over time. In the insurance industry, for example, we quite often see spikes in data quality at month end due to a high volume of renewals coming through. More data being processed, there's likelihood of more issues. So we can scale our data steward teams up to make sure that we've got the right people to resolve these issues at the right time. And if your business expects data by 8 a.m. every morning or on a 5-second refresh, then it's important that we meet those SLAs to ensure we don't erode trust. And if there is an issue, it's important that we have a process in place so that we can communicate the issue to our users as soon as possible and then communicate again once that issue is resolved. Things like team notifications, Slack channels, emails, portals with dashboards in them are all good ways I've seen this implemented. And finally, where we can bring consistency to our terms, we should. There will always be scenarios where we need it to be different for a different context. And in those cases, go back to the transparency pillar. Make sure you're using naming conventions so you can really tell those definitions apart. The user knows what they're looking at, and they know what they're looking at over time. But that was a lot of technical stuff. And we know that trust is much more personal. So it's the next one, user centricity, is all about meeting people where they are. There's a bakery near my house. And when we first moved in, it was rather dull and uninviting. I was never really sure if it was open or closed. I didn't know anyone that had ever been in there. About a year later, some new owners took over. They spruced the place up, they put out some chairs and a big sign outside that said, "Come in and try our famous cinnamon buns." So we went in. The owner came over, they said hello. They showed us all the different pastries and cakes and coffees and smoothies that they served, and they gave us that welcome feeling. Other people then recommended it to us. We recommended it to other people. 6 years later, we still go to that bakery multiple times a week. And about 50% of the time, they upsell us something because there's always samples and there's always something new to try. They know our names, they know our kids' names, they know our relatives' names that visit about twice a year. They've created a really great community spirit and somewhere that people trust to go, and they'll pick them up. What does your shopfront for data look like? For a lot of people, it's like walking into a library where none of the books are labeled. Don't make your users hunt around. Think about where you can add personalization. A data portal where they're greeted with their name, where they see data sets or reports that are relevant to their role, where they can see what other people in their team are using. Maybe things like top tips or how-to, small bite-sized areas of engagement. Then you can start to build out bigger data literacy programs and guided experience once you've nailed that first impression and got people interested and curious. And sometimes people just want to talk to people. So these data sets should have an owner that is championing the quality of the data in that data set or data report or data product, whatever it is. They're also working with those change programs to ensure that they're not going to break the data that you're using to make your insights. And they're there on hand for a call when you just want to know if you're using it for the right purpose or there's an issue that you've spotted. And they're prioritizing that backlog of enhancements and issues. But even with transparency, consistency, and user centricity, if we're not making some noise about it, it's hard to drive this trust across the organization. And this is where our champions come in. Because people will always go with what other people endorse. So where do you find these champions? There's a bottom-up approach where you go and talk to people in the organization. We went and found our usage reports, and we found the top 5 people of the data sets we were trying to drive adoption for. We asked them what they used it for. We asked them how they got access to it in the first place. What more would they like to do with it? They quickly became our bottom-up champions and gave us some really good metrics that we could then talk to other people about. Time saving, cost reductions, quicker getting to insights, reducing complexity. We can also have the top-down as well. We've had experience where executive leaders will endorse using data from a trusted source. If a report was shown to them that contained data not from the trusted data platform, they politely ask that person to go away and come back once they got the data from the trusted source. This top-down shows that using trusted data within the organization is non-negotiable. And once we found these champions, we need to give them a platform. Is there a way of applying things like star ratings, putting testimonials alongside your data to drive that adoption forward? And then use them to go beyond the standard usage metrics to get metrics for how this data is really helping their business. So the pillars of trust are our principles for building trust within an organization. The framework for trust is how we put it into action. Trust through knowing where the data comes from. Trust through prioritizing issues and fixes. Trust through having owners that are there caring for the data and advocating. Trust because it's valuable to you. It's giving you insights that you wouldn't have otherwise had. Trust because it's used. When people use the data, they can get more insights by collaborating, and they can spot issues quicker. And trust because it's relevant. By taking feedback from both systems and people, we ensure that the data that we have within our ecosystem is continuing to meet the needs of the business. After all, data without purpose is just noise. So we want to clear the noise out and make way for the new data we need to bring in to make that challenge of tomorrow. And this is what it can look like when trusted data is put into practice. The ability to improve our commercial decision-making. The reduction in our inefficiencies, in our costs, and in the time spent and the number of issues raised by the business. We can spot them and fix them before it even has any business impact. And true adoption of our data tools. Not just an export to Excel, but full use of those data tools that are available in the organization. So that's the 6-step framework. To put into action the 4 principles of our one goal: to deliver trusted data within our organizations. Imagine if everyone in your organization trusted their data to make accurate, confident decisions every day. You could then start to delegate those decisions to AI. Because when we have trusted data, we're not just solving today's problems, we're reimagining how we can work tomorrow. For me, trusted data is not just a technical exercise, it's a passion. And I truly believe that when you are data-driven, you're not just making better decisions, but you are creating a culture of confidence throughout the organization. I hope you've enjoyed some of the perspectives I've shared with you today, and I'd love to talk more about how trusted data could deliver value in your organizations. Thank you.